Good evening, and welcome to the Purdue University's African American Studies and Research Center 30th Biannual Symposium on African American Culture and Philosophy. My name is Ronald Stevens, and I'm the director of the program. And before I introduce our dean, I want to give acknowledgments to the sponsors of this program, which includes the College of Liberal Arts, the College of Education, the College of Veterinary Medicine, the College of Health and Human Sciences, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the School of Languages and Cultures, the Bryant Lamb School of Communication, the Graduate School, the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, the Cranard School of Management, the Center for Trans-Institutional Capacity, the Center for Research on Diversity and Inclusion, the Purdue University Polytech Institute, Purdue Libraries, the Department of English, the Department of History, the Department of Political Science, the Department of Psychological Sciences, and of course, American Studies program. Before introducing you to one of the nation's leading figures working at the intersection of African American studies and community informatics, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. David A. Ringert, the Justin Morrow Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, who will be sharing a few thoughts with you about the symposium and about the subject of this symposium.
Thank you, Ron. And good evening. Is this working? Hopefully it's working. Good. All right. So it's my pleasure and honor to be here and to welcome you to this year's African American Studies and Research Center Symposium. I started at Purdue about a year and a half ago, and this is my first time actually being able to sort of come and be a part of this storied symposium. And I'm particularly proud that the African American Studies program, and under Ron's leadership within the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, is a part of CLA, and as an affiliate faculty member of African American Studies, it's particularly touching to me to be here. I've told Ron on several occasions that I'm purposely not showing up to some of the faculty meetings, in part because I don't want to make his life too difficult. But at some point here, I may have to sort of change course and start showing up, because it is something that's close to my heart as a sociologist who's worked on topics related to race and poverty in urban America over the past 25 years. A number of the issues that the African American Studies program focuses on are close to my own scholarship and my own passions and interests. With that, I want to give a special thanks to Professor Stevens for all of his hard work and putting together what looks like to be a fabulous symposium, as well as to Venitra Patton, Professor Patton, the head of the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, for all of her efforts, and Matilda and the staff who have, I know, have worked very, very hard on making sure that we're going to have a wonderful symposium and a successful event. And let me just, a few things I want to say. First, I want to reaffirm, frequently, since I've gotten to Purdue, I hear a lot about sort of the focus of Purdue around science and engineering and the like, but Purdue is a comprehensive research university, and I think this is evidence of that. And the fact that we've been at it for now 30 years signifies that this is nothing new. It's not new that we're a comprehensive research university, and our continued focus in areas related to the African American experience, I think, affirms that. Now, I want to just say real quickly that the topic that the conference and the symposium we're going to focus on, related to digital humanities, is a topic that I'm very interested in. And this week, people have been sort of participating. Hopefully you have. We've had a number of events related to digital humanities to really sort of try and continue to galvanize a community of scholars who have an interest in this area, and the symposium is sort of in many ways sort of the capstone to the week's events, and it's really just a delight to see this much interest and activity focused around what is really, I think, a defining venue for us moving forward. So I appreciate the focus, and I'm mindful that one of the things I've been very pleasantly surprised by, in the academy we struggle over how to value the impact of a particular book or a particular article, or to define what is scholarship. And certainly in the digital age, the way in which people participate is changing. And there are a lot of universities, frankly, that are really struggling with this question of what is scholarship, and how to define it, and how do you incorporate sort of the fact that we're in the 21st century. And I will say, one of the things that's been very heartening to me since arriving at Purdue is how open-minded many of our colleagues, not all of them, but many of them are, to the ideas, sort of broadening out the horizons of what is scholarship and what is sort of knowledge production and truth-seeking. And I think that bodes very well for us, particularly within the context of African American studies and research, as we think about sort of the future and work towards defining that future. So hopefully through the course of the next day or 2 days, 2.5 days, you will help continue that conversation, and that will continue to sort of seep into the DNA and the fiber of both the College of Liberal Arts and Purdue University. So with that, I just want to say on behalf of the college and the university, I want to wish you a productive and thought-provoking and meaningful symposium. We're delighted that we could be a sponsor to it among many, which is a testament to the hard work that's been done so far. And I want to welcome all of our visitors from other parts of the country who are here maybe for the first time. Welcome to West Lafayette and welcome to Purdue. We're delighted that you're here, and I'm confident that you will have a wonderful and a positive experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Stevens.
Thank you.
I want to note that this event is being live streamed, and the hashtag is HumanitiesINDH. The hashtag is HumanitiesINDH. I also would like to remind you that we have an exhibit right across the hall on Idlewild, Michigan, entertainment in Idlewild, Michigan, and at the end of this event, there's a reception right next door here. Okay, it's really a great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker. I met him about 10 years ago, maybe more. I was interested in some work on Robert Williams, whom he knew personally and who he worked with, and of course, as one of the founding members of the Institute of the Black World. He was one of the members to attend the second conference of that organization, which was in Idlewild, Michigan. So it's a great honor to have him here. Dr. Abdul is a native of Chicago, Illinois. He received his PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago. He is a professor emeritus in the Department of African American Studies and the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research focuses on digital inequality, community informatics, and African American intellectual history. He is the author of several books, of which at the end of his talk he'll be doing a book signing. One of the most popular books is Introduction to Afro-American Studies, a long-time text in the discipline that is still used, has a lot of currency, introduces some of the ideas that are missing in the intro course in African American Studies. He's also the author of The African American Experience in Cyberspace and Malcolm X for Beginners. His most recent book, which is co-authored with the Associate Professor Kay Williams, is Roots and Flowers, the Life and Work of the Afro-Cuban Librarian Martha Terry Gonzalez. A pioneer of e-Black studies, Professor Alkalimat curates two important websites related to African American history: Malcolm X, a research site, and E-Black Studies, which many of you, I'm sure, are aware of. He moderated the largest African American studies discussion list, H-Afro-Am, from 1998 to 2014. Professor Alkalimat has also been a member of the faculty at University of Toledo before going to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It was on May 31st, 2007, in which he retired from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Among the many accolades he received during his career of nearly 5 decades, he was honored on campus with the 2008 Outstanding Teacher in African American Studies Award. The quality of his teaching was reflected in the recognition and respect he earned from his students, which was of primary importance to him. In his talk this evening, the Sankofa Principle, From the Drum to the Digital, he will present the results of 20 years of scholarship regarding how digital information technology can change the field of African American studies. Join me in welcoming Professor Abdul Alkalimat.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, hello. It's a great pleasure to be here, to have been asked to give this keynote address. And I want to first give a thanks to Professor Stevens and his staff for being gracious hosts and for that generous introduction. Let's see if this works. No, that's the end. I love having the opportunity to share my views on the subject of our conference, as it has been driving my scholarship and activism for the past couple of decades. In addition, it gives me an opportunity to learn from young scholars, such as yourselves, emerging in this new intellectual environment of Black studies and digital humanities. Our conference theme is an exciting one, exploring the humanity in the digital humanities, Africana Black Studies perspectives on the digital humanities. As we live in the whirlwind of racist oppression, there is no more important task than to find a way to affirm our very humanity, that which racism most viciously attacks. We constantly realize the wisdom of what that great African revolutionary Amilcar Cabral instructed us to do, to always return to the source. The people, our people, create the ontological and epistemological basis for who we are and what we can know about ourselves. So I like our theme very much. The opening part of this talk will set a framework for our thinking, arguing that a historical perspective is foundational and necessary at all times. This is especially true at times like now when we are experiencing such a crisis in our society. I call the framework we need the Sankofa Principle, and with it we can link the drum, foundational technology to Black culture, with the emerging transformational power of digital technology. Given this, I will share with you a summary of the results of our 20 years of work building a body of knowledge we call E-Black Studies. You know about email, you know about e-commerce, we're talking about E-Black Studies. And I know at Purdue, that must sound like music to your ears. How informational technology can be used to rethink and rebuild how we do Black studies. As those of us here know, rethinking the implication of digital technology is a necessary task as we face this revolutionary transformation of all of society, and most certainly the institutions of higher education. We have to recognize the need to change. We also have to understand that the more things change, the more they remain the same in some respects. This is a dialectical approach to history, to change. It's the heart of how we understand history, always combining the new and the old, and what we have known, what we are just beginning to know. And third, we have to agree to use both science and art, reason and emotion, both sides of our brains to be truly and fully human. This is not some kind of neutral undertaking. Black people must remain, in this society, black people remain very much exploited and oppressed. So black studies must always remain true to its origin, link itself back to the struggle of black people to be free, to the struggle of this society to move beyond its history of negation to a history of affirmation. So E-Black is part of a new stage of scholarship, and it is also a new arm of the Black liberation movement. Now, Black studies has gone through 3 historical stages of development. Black studies as social movement, as academic profession, and as knowledge network. These are not absolutely sequential stages, but rather overlapping modalities of how we operate, how we do what we do. Every organizational manifestation of the Black liberation movement has always had an educational component. These educational activities have been based in community institutions like churches and libraries. The best 20th century example of this is Black History Month, activity established by Carter G. Woodson in 1926. There was also the Garvey, UNIA, the work of Noble Drew Ali and his Moorish Science Temple, the Mississippi Summer Project Freedom Schools in the 1960s, and the many manifestations of the left, from the Communist Party to the Black Panther Party to the various forms of a people's college. When Black studies was vaulted into the mainstream educational institutions by the radicalized Black student movement in the 1960s, a new academic profession was born. So for the last 50 years, we have now had at least 3 generations of Black intellectuals socialized into the academic mainstream in its various manifestations, from community colleges to PhD level institutions, including the most elite private schools. And now we are once again being transformed by our new digital tools and the opportunities that are opening up to us. As an academic profession, we left our community to face the internal review process for hiring, for peer review publishing, for promotion to tenure, in exchange for the professional perks of job security, a solid middle-class salary, sometimes not so solid, international travel, and status. But now, information technology is providing a way for us to reconnect with the community. Digital tools provide an easy way to cross over what often seems like a feudal moat that separates the campus from the community. We are only a click away if we are willing to drop the virtual drawbridge down and follow the path of open source and the Creative Commons, uniting us with the free culture movement. In fact, this makes the task begun by Du Bois and others easier in many ways. But as we do this, we are reminded of the terror that our community faces. Nothing should ever make us forget that we are part of a community under attack. These men and women being killed are part of our family. They are our humanity that must be respected and protected. We do not yet know all of the names, but for most of us, there is a current name in our very own town or county that each of us knows very well that has suffered this same fate. We are part of this moment when Black people's struggle is being born again as a new generation of activists is emerging in the community and on campus. If Black lives matter, this should nowhere be more important than in Black studies. Indeed, our conference theme is saying in different words that Black lives matter. Now, this particular slide is talking about the connectivity of Black people to information technology. So if you look here, this is broadband at home. In other words, a big pipe that enables you to actively interact with the digital in a rapid manner. In other words, fast. what we all would like to have. And if you notice, African Americans have the greatest decline in broadband at home. On the other hand, when you look at smartphones, you see that what black people are doing, the largest transfer of the use of digital technology to a smartphone as opposed to a computer. This has much importance and implications for what people can do. You can chat on a phone, you don't write your term papers on a phone. But with our focus on the digital, we have to be connected, we have to be concerned with the glaring inequality of the digital divide. We are not behind in cell phone use, but in other areas we are far behind any form of equity in the effective use of digital tools. Let us also remember that Black Studies is not exactly a safe space. Maybe there are no safe spaces. Neoliberalism brings the market framework to all of our institutions. For us, this means our students have become customers while we serve as salespersons of institutionalized knowledge. Corporatized knowledge is force-fed into our consciousness via mass media and the ever-present digital monopolies of Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. None of us should feel so secure that we think we are playing the game because, in fact, at the same time, the game is playing us. So in the end, we have to raise the level of our game and understand that the struggle must be waged in cyberspace, as that is the new arena in which we are being attacked and marginalized. It is also the arena in which we have new possibility for various forms of Black unity. So once again, it's the worst of times and the best of times as well. And all of this is why we need the Sankofa principle. Now, Sankofa is a word in the Twi language of people who live in Ghana. Its literal meaning is, go back and fetch it, referring to knowledge that one needs. Each elder is a manifestation of this Sankofa principle as people value their memory as a vital source of knowledge and wisdom. African intellectual history, in all disciplines, utilizes this principle, especially the writing of autobiographies. The history of our people and of each of us has been at the center of the intellectual production of each successive generation. There's no more important principle in Black intellectual history than the Sankofa principle. Of course, when we do this, we are free to accept the fact that knowledge comes in many forms, from oral history to written text and now to digital media. The information we seek and need has to be validated in its many forms without privileging one and disregarding or devaluing the rest. This too is about the humanity of our people and their history. All these forms of knowledge are simultaneously operational today and can be represented in a digital form. For a moment, let's consider a historical polarity when comparing the drum in traditional society with digital tools today. There are similarities and differences. Both are code generation machines made by human beings in many diverse forms, large and small, different colors for style, usually operated by human hands, and both being the basis for literacy in communicating and performing cultural activities. This suggests there are sustainable features of human culture and that the past links to the present. There are important differences. We made our drums from natural materials, wood and animal skins. We embraced an organic relationship to nature out of necessity and out of the sustainable cultural practices. Digital tools are built on industrial production, augmented by major advances in the use of electricity, the mining of metals from Africa, like coltan from the Congo, necessary for cell phone production, and the exploitation of labor in China, like the 1.4 million workers at Foxconn that produce all the Apple products that we use. Drums were specific to a cultural context in form and the content of its sound. To hear a drum was to hear a specific people's cultural production. Computers represent a new standardization of global culture, as we basically see the same machines used all over the world. The drum was local, and now the digital is global. And most important of all, for culture and knowledge, the drum was heard when played and had to be played over and over again. Whereas the digital is both instantaneous in ways that far exceeds what the traditional drum could do, and at the same time has a simultaneous capacity to be archived and stored in some kind of memory facility for replication when called upon. Now, of course, we know that the shelf life of each of these storage facilities and gadgets is up for question. And it's not likely to match what paper has accomplished, at least not that we know so far. Of course, technological change has been constant over the years, including both written text and the capturing of voice and visual action. At each stage, our people have had to change and adapt to new conditions. Sometimes black people in the community and on campus have had access and control of these aspects of technology, but in many instances, these technologies have been in the hands of others and have been used at times against and then sometimes for the interest of black people. And of course, nothing demonstrates this more than the reruns of old movies on TV that remind us of all the negative and sometimes positive. I mean, they're still running Tarzan, and I don't mean the new version, I'm talking about the old version. And Abbott and Bud Lou Costello go to Africa and all those things. They're constantly bringing this back. So we have this constant interaction with the past based on these new technologies. So the Sankofa principle is a fundamental feature of how we think to live, to affirm our humanity. We do this not only to honor our elders and ancestors, but because this is the wealth that our young people need to survive and prosper. In the very early years, black children are part of the promise of humanity that all children represent. But they are subject to all the biological and psychological warfare being waged against black people through factory food and the drug industries, legal and illegal. And they are taught to be inferior by a system that conspires to negate our humanity. This sets the agenda we must address in our scholarship and activism in this information revolutionary period we are living in. This has been the driving force in my thinking that has led to E-Black Studies. Technology is wedded to ideology. This means that when something is developed, it has been designed by people who are imposing their orientation on the world through invention. Let me just give you one example in computer technology. I'm going to quote from the source of all wisdom, Wikipedia. Master-slave is a model of communication where one device or process has unidirectional control over one or more devices. In some systems, a master is selected from a group of eligible devices and the other devices acting in the role of slaves. In other words, the master-slave configuration is basically used for load-sharing purposes when two identical motors connected to two different drives are coupled to a common load. One drive is defined as the master and is configured for running in the speed control mode, whereas the other are defined as slaves, is configured for running in torque control mode. In other words, somebody thought up that the way to describe a technological function was to use the words master and slave. So we have to enter the digital game with our own set of assumptions that can serve as our orientation without falling prey to this kind of historical reference that functions to negate us. In fact, our values reflect the universal possibility of the digital age, just the way just the way that the freedom movement has always proclaimed the maximum possibility of democracy in this society. Now, using the Sankofa principle, I am proposing we consider three fundamental values when we deal with the question of digital scholarship and the digital humanities relative to the theme of our conference. First, cyber democracy. This is a necessary mandate to link with our entire community. As academics, we live and work in resource-rich institutions and must always find ways to share with those in our community most in need of digital tools and the skills to use them. Second, collective intelligence. Contrary to racist thinking, we know that all black people think. Now, that's an interesting idea. About what? And have about anything their experience enables them to reflect on, just like all other human beings. They think and have a rational capacity to develop ideas about how they view themselves and the society. Our digital tools make it possible to consider and include every voice in our analysis, opening up our data collection and research strategies to affirm this. Third, information freedom. Privatization and commodification of all culture and information is the main thesis of neoliberalism, and we must oppose this at every manifestation and fight for culture and information to be free for all to share. These three values are universal for Eat Black Studies scholars. Now we turn to method. This is going to be the heart of what I'm talking about. This method, the D7 method, is what is at the heart of Eat Black Studies. We have designed what we call the D7 method. This is a revision of what is generally called the scientific method, because we have added D3, digitization, and D7, difference. Of course, some data is born digital, and therefore D2 and D3 would be merged into one. So let's walk through this. D1, definition. The task here is to identify a problem to address in your research. Within that, what specific research question will the research seek to answer? The Sankofa principle requires us first to investigate this research question with an intensive review of the literature. Here, the Black librarian is a valuable collaborator, and there is a century of research to rely upon. Now, this is very important. What we're talking about here, not only do black people think, but black people have a history of intellectual production. This is a century bibliographical reference to black scholarship. In other words, higher education as an institution of racism has always marginalized the intellectual production of black people. This demonstrates that you can take any problem you're looking at and deal with it historically. In other words, what we used to say is, if you want to see far, climb to the top of the tallest trees in the forest. These are the trees you need to climb upon, if you can hear what I'm trying to tell you. This century plus of research on African America is available through the decades if you consult the bibliographical mapping of black intellectual history. There have always been scholars who provide comprehensive bibliographical tracking of black intellectual production. The preeminent scholars in this regard include Monroe Work, Arturo Schomburg, Dorothy Porter, Gene Hudson, among others. Now, in this regard, I want to particularly make reference to a 1946 book by Harry Green, Holders of Doctorates Among African American Negroes. This is an inclusive, detailed directory of all PhD and MA holders to that date and the data on their work. This is a demonstration of what is required. If you're a serious student, then you would get down with this material. That's what I'm talking about. Our own work in this regard was producing a quarterly comprehensive listing of books and articles from 1983 to 1992 in a publication we called Afro Scholar. This is now online and can be easily accessed. The main point here is to place our research in the historical process of the generational production of knowledge, never failing to consult our history because important information is always there. Each field of scholarship has a history, and each major research question has a history that usually has been taken up by several disciplines. All research either confirms what is known, challenges and replaces what has been known, or adds something entirely new. These are the only three results of all scholarship. But one can't know which unless the historical review of the literature has been done. D1, definition, is about formulating a research question, something you want your research to answer. Data collection. This creates the basis for answering a research question. It is important in all cases that we think of our population of people as not only objects but as, for our analysis, but also as thinking subjects who can always contribute to the design and implementation of research as well as in the analysis. Now, some data is born digital, and this requires its own methodology. For instance, we used born digital data to make the first comprehensive survey of Black Studies academic units. Our first attempt was in the 1990s, and at that time, many units didn't have a web presence. But today, it's the norm, and it has the value of being self-reported data. So in 2013, we found that 76% of almost 1,800 US colleges and universities have been impacted by Black studies. 20% having established formal units, and 56% having changed the curriculum of their existing units. Since our survey, the annual obituary notices of Black studies that were published in the New York Times and the Chronicle of Higher Education have stopped, but of course not the attacks. And by the way, this study I'm talking about, we have a copy of it over there, and on this end of the table, all that material is free. So I see a lot of students here, you can go up and get something. Everybody here ought to leave with something, not just that you heard, but something you can carry with you. Digitization. This is a new feature of eBlack Studies research, moving our data and analysis into digital form. One of the main features is that we can embrace research as a collective activity, bridging time and space. For us as individuals, this means that our research is with us whenever we have our laptop at hand. Those of us using larger data sets will need network connectivity to get that data. But more than this, we have the possibility of developing what might be called a Black Studies collaboratory. Let me just quote a definition of what a collaboratory is. Like, for example, you might have this room as a lab, and that whole wall might be a giant monitor that shows you a lab in some other part of the world, and you work together, so time and space and distance is erased. A collaboratory is a center without walls in which the nation's researchers can perform their research without regard to physical location, interacting with colleagues, accessing instrumentation, sharing data and computational resources, and accessing information in digital libraries. There are three major forms of digitization. Digitization of discourse, virtual communities of scholars and activists, digitization of scholarship, digitization of experience. And by the way, you really don't need to take any pictures of the slides because there's a pamphlet with all this information in it on the table for sale. But very, very cheap. Okay, scholarship, experience. So as mentioned in discourse, this is an example of, wait a minute. This is an example of using YouTube to gather examples of speech by a list of people who are active theorists in the Black liberation movement. So we went to YouTube and other places, gathered it all up, aggregated it, and created a community where people are now talking to each other, and that anyone who accesses this can access all these different voices. And And of course, using social media, you'll have a presentation on that on Saturday, like when Burgess Jules and his colleagues will talk about using Twitter and other forms of social media to, again, study discourse, which is really a way to study consciousness. The digitization of scholarship is taking new forms and provides new functionality. This connects with data collection in that we have the need for comprehensive data sets that are inclusive of relevant information on each major topic being studied. This is a really important point because a lot of times people are, replicate activities. And what we're talking about now is creating large data sets that are inclusive of all objects of knowledge about a particular subject. So for example, there's one historian, or a group of historians really, that are looking at all the data of all the slave ships between Africa and the New World. Every slave ship. And therefore, the analysis of that vast body of data is what the digital study allows us to do. And so all of us then, we're in the age now where our research should be contributing to this. Or for example, Miriam McGraham and her colleagues at the University of Kansas are collecting every African-American novel and putting that in a database. In other words, that's a finite number of things, and it's just about finding them all, and when you find them all, and we can then begin to analyze the data about them. A major advance in this has been the software called DSpace, developed at MIT in 2002. This is an open source tool for archiving scholarship. This has been adopted at many institutions: Deep Blue, University of Michigan; Ideals, the University of Illinois; and PUR, the Purdue University Research Repository, here at this institution. The promise of DSpace is every scientific research article by the faculty and by the students will be digitized and archived forever at a university. Now, this is the future. Now, if you're at an institution that doesn't have DSpace, or if you're in an institution and you do not participate in DSpace, then you will be forgotten. This is the difference between being remembered and part of that permanent repository of knowledge, or being forgotten. This is something to think about. I know y'all are young, but the world and history and life, and those of us with gray hair know this is a long thing, And sometimes your greatest work is when you're young, So keeping it around is important. It's very important. Now, this is part of the reflection of the work that we've been doing on Malcolm X. This is an example of what I'm talking about in terms of aggregating information. So if you go to our website on Malcolm, you will find, for example, all of the videos. You will find all of the texts. You will find chronology. You will find webliography and bibliography. And so what we're trying to do is aggregate everything. One-stop shopping really is what we're talking about. Now, the digitization of experience is a very important way of connecting our digital work with our community. Now, what did we do? Well, in the case of Toledo, Ohio, we digitized every beauty parlor, every barbershop. These are sites of cultural production. They're also sites of discourse. They're sites of networking and bonding. These are very important locations. All you have to do is talk to a sister who's moved to a place and there ain't no beauty parlor. You know what I mean? It's a serious matter. This is, we collected all of the web presence about the black communities all over the state of Illinois. We collected digital information of every church in town. And here in Champaign-Urbana, we created a digital site that contains 10 24-hour days of video and audio, 50,000 pages of text, 1,000 photographs, and we have over 58,000 users so far. And in the process, we found a woman who has uploaded 9,000 community photos to Facebook in 1 year. Graduate student Noah Lenstra, who is one of our graduate students who's now gone on to be on the faculty of the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Discovery. Discovery is how one answers the key research question. The test is best argued back into the context of the review of the literature, utilized when defining the research question. Remember, there are three forms that the findings of a research project takes: to confirm what is known, to contest what has been recorded in the research literature, or to address a new question. In the digital humanities, we have the great opportunity to raise new research questions, but only when this has been validated by an extensive review of the literature. This validates that our work is special. There's nothing special about our work unless we could prove it. Just because it's digital doesn't mean it's automatically all of that. Design. Now, you know, this is an interesting point, because when the budget crisis hits a city, one of the first things they do is eliminate art and music. Precisely at the time when the digital environment uses art and music. Really an interesting contradiction in the society. But findings don't speak for themselves. They have to be presented in a comprehensible form to whomever is the target audience. And audience matters. For eBlack Studies, this includes Black Studies scholars, the Black community, and the broader global network of scholars in the digital humanities. The digital includes video, audio, and graphics of all kinds. So we have a great opportunity to be creative in maximizing who we can speak to, both out of our desire for academic excellence, as well as the historical necessity for social responsibility. In fact, in a conference in 1977, it was my good fortune to invent that slogan that became the mission statement of the National Council for Black Studies: academic excellence and social responsibility, some 40 years ago. I was just a baby. Each design for each audience then has to have effort behind it to make contact with that audience. For scholars, this means having the energy to make multiple submissions based on listening to reviewers, but having thick skin to avoid being discouraged. The best way to do this is to have your first audience some colleagues close to you who support you and who you trust, who will read and critique your work. And for students, what this means is form a study group. Get with some people. That's the only way really to be successful. You cannot be successful if you live in a silo and you're isolated from a conversation about what you're dealing with. The main target for scholarly articles is a journal. But for the Black community, we have the mass media, radio, TV, cable channels, the internet, especially Facebook, sharing within networks. Here the language is key, as we must accept the challenge of speaking in plain language and not being trapped in academic jargon. Remember what people said when Malcolm X spoke: make it plain, brother, make it plain. D7, difference. And finally, we have to include change in our framework to make sure we don't get caught in the self-serving process of seeking approval from academic gatekeepers and ignoring the change we need on so many levels. Research is about finding out what is real and true, and as we do this over time, we change ourselves, and then we stand on this knowledge that we know very well. In sharing this with our colleagues, we seek to change research in general as well. But also, research on Black people always has some kind of policy implications for the U.S. and indeed other parts of the world. This is our responsibility. Remember, academic excellence and social responsibility. But a word of caution: don't expect one research paper to change the world. It's our task to design research programs, a process involving many specific research projects, amassing large quantities of data, and critiques of alternative explanations. I know a dude who spent his entire career studying one variable: the integration of schools. What led to it and what happened as a result of it. So when you begin an academic career, you have to really understand the phrase, the devil's in the details. But you have to reverse that. God is in the details. And you must go and find the truth to that. Okay, so the D7 method. Now I want to talk about the discourse, not so much as a research method, but as a way to create a discourse community in the field of Black studies. I edited the listserv H-Afro-Am from 1998 to 2014. 17 years of building a community to share a conversation every weekday. And as you can see, sometimes there was what we call a thread, and many people spoke on the same issue, and other times, and this is just all in the same day. And here, this is all in the day, and you can see that there are just many different topics. Over the 17 years, there were more than 21,000 messages covering more than 12,000 topics. This is just a timeline, and the slope of that line you can see represents the increase in the number of messages as the community became more engaged with itself. Reviewers were diverse and writers were diverse too. Close to 1 in 5 topics, or 18%, generated two or more messages. That is a thread, a conversation. 2% of all topics had 10 or more messages. And this is interesting. The longest thread was 69 messages on the same topic, which was passing. Now, I'll just let you all figure out why that was the case. But I mean, I would think sometimes, ooh, this is an important thing. There'll be a whole conversation about it. Nothing. Then somebody would raise something and I would say, oh, this is just going to be a one-off. There'd be a conversation. So it's very interesting, you know, to have thousands of people engaged in a conversation with each other. And what's interesting about this is that, as you could see, much more happens in this context for conversation than happens in a conference, or a conference like this. This is important. Face-to-face is important, you know. And I mean, I like to see you all, you know what I mean? And maybe you like to see me. But the point is that that's different than cyberspace. But they're both important to understand, and we have to reflect on these things. H-Afro-Am was part, and it continues to be part of HNet, a service organization based at Michigan State University that offers virtual communities for academic fields of study based on the work of volunteer academics. From its start in 1992 until 2014, it was based on the simple and yet effective use of email. They then made the mistake of fixing what wasn't broke, hiring consultants to switch from listservs to a Drupal content management system website. And then HNet discussions, that they called them, really declined in importance. In other words, they changed the software, made it much more complicated and much more involved, thinking they were really becoming very much more digital, and then they lost the mass audience and so on. So we have to be very careful about becoming intoxicated with the new technologies. You have to remember the Edsel, that car that didn't work. A lot of these technologies are just not going to be all of that. So I think email is the bomb. Of course, the final step in the digital humanities, as in all genres of research, are the memory institutions. Memory institutions are where we store our information for later retrieval. My strong advice for all scholars is to combine the storage of hard copy as well as digital formatting. The venerable institutions like the Library of Congress, the Moreland Spingarn Archive at Howard University, and the Schomburg Center and New York City are some of the institutions that have been and will continue to store hard copy. But we have to also to pay attention to what has been mentioned as DSpace software, option on the campus, as well as a more inclusive internet archive founded by Brewster Kahle in 1996 that now contains 20 petabytes of data, 370 million websites, and 273 billion pages. This guy set out to archive the internet. That's a story you really ought to check out. I mean, this is, you just imagine the scale of thinking involved in such a project. Our work in this regard we call BRAIN, Black Research Archive on the Internet. We just wanted to demonstrate how such a virtual institution could be developed as part of e-Black studies. It's critical that we activate the memory institutions so that our work is preserved for generations to come. We are indeed ancient to the future. I want to say that again. We are ancient to the future. Can you feel me on that? Okay. Now, we have argued there is a necessary relationship between e-Black studies and the Black liberation movement. But more specifically, we will now theorize this point and relate it to our research program. The connection between Black studies and the community can be redefined by using an approach to social phenomena called social informatics. Our research program is in a sub-area of this new field that is called community informatics, how the community is facing the digital age, not us as individuals, but the community, its institutions, its social life. We're especially concerned with the historical, spatial, organic communities that have defined the history of human society up to the present time. You know what I'm talking about. The neighborhood you all grew up in. That community. The neighborhood store, the church, the school, the hobby groups, the next door neighbor, the family genealogical networks. We know our community faces a relative digital divide, not in the use of cell phones and texting, but in the full use of computers. So our first concern is how to intervene at this historical moment to deal with this fundamental issue of social inequality in the information society. We are focused on social solutions like public libraries and computer labs in churches and community centers. Kate Williams has theorized that what she calls the informatics moment is a critical instance of social interaction when we help each other get over the digital divide. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. You're sitting in front of a computer and you don't see something you ain't never seen before. And you turn to somebody and say, you ever seen this? You know how to get over this? I have a glitch, I have a problem. In other words, we're always interacting with each other to help each other on the computer. Nobody is like, way up there and they know everything. It's a constant thing. And as technology changes, it will remain constant. So these informatics moments are very important. And librarians, for example, are being transformed because the computers are growing and people are in there, and the librarian has to define themselves in relationship to the needs of their constituency, and their constituency has digital needs. And sometimes it's not a computer. Sometimes it's a cell phone. Sometimes it's a camera. How do I deal with this? I'm trying to connect with my grandson. I'm trying to send this picture. So this information processing and the informatics moment is very important. Now, Loa Lenstra, who I mentioned before as a graduate student that we just sent off to the University of North Carolina, he examined the informatics moment as a dissertation, and he now calls he defined what he calls the informatics life cycle, because he studied the digital behavior of seniors. So he was looking at the whole life cycle and how different dynamics occur at different stages of life. Our general model for our research program involves cyber power. Cyber power as the main dependent variable. So the community, the physical reality, in other words, all computing takes place somewhere by somebody using some tools. and this is the cyberspace what's created. And so what we're really examining is cyber power. How black people get black power to impact and change their lives using digital tools in the information society. We recruit the community as colleagues in the research we call community informatics. Don't worry, I'm coming near the end. An example of the impact of cyber power in Black Studies is a model we developed during our tenure as founding head of the Black Studies program at the University of Toledo in the 1990s. In each of the 5 major areas, we transformed procedures. So, discourse, conference face-to-face, the listserv discussion, HAfroAm, which I've already explained. Classroom, distance learning. We brought a brother from Ghana to the University of Toledo, spent a semester, he developed 2 courses, went back to Ghana, taught from Ghana back to the University of Toledo using distance learning tools. I got more to say about that. Anyway, research productivity, websites, research websites, sharing, public policy, advocacy websites. We developed the website, the basis for the Black Radical Congress that happened in 1998. Community service, I've already discussed the digitization of everyday life. Incidentally, after I left the University of Toledo, Reuben Patterson, who took over as head of Black Studies, who's now at Howard University as chair of the sociology department, he expanded that and got colleagues from Tanzania and South Africa to also teach. This is very important because what we're talking about is a brain drain from Africa to the United States, which then of course means an intellectual loss. And so with this new technology, we're able to teach courses all over the world. And so we're now talking about not having the source of legitimate knowledge about Africa coming from Europe or from the US institutions. We're talking about the legitimate knowledge about Africa being generated and distributed out of Africa by Africans themselves. This is a very important development that we have to really examine in our own institutional lives. One final warning is that the information society is not heaven on earth. We live a bit of hell. All of the major digital companies that provide the virtual environments in which we volunteer to share our information cooperate directly with the surveillance agencies of the state. There's no such thing as privacy anymore. This is not a time to be naive about the kind of society we live in. This is another instance when we need the Sankofa principle. After all, we have endured slavery and slave-like conditions that match and exceed what people mean by fascism. We have our history to learn from. We should reach back and gather the best of our past, what our past has to teach us, so that we can achieve our full potential as we move forward. Whatever we have lost, forgotten, or foregone, or been stripped of, can be reclaimed, revived, preserved, and perpetuated. In conclusion, I hope this talk has been food for thought, been an example of work that can help you think about your work. Knowledge is from the people and for the people, so it must be with the digital. But don't forget that books will still be important. Remember the values: cyber democracy, collective intelligence, information freedom. Thank you very much.
So at this point, does anybody have any questions?
My question takes the form. You think so? Okay. The question I have with you in this regard is that I didn't hear a lot about putting things in a hierarchy. I hear a lot about collecting data, information, but I'm not hearing anything about a hierarchy in terms of be able to interpret it. I'm hearing a lot of digitization, but we live in an analog world. And the analog world is about peaks and valleys in that regard. So how do you hierarchy this information to absorb it? Because information availability is not wisdom.
Yeah, I sort of mentioned, thank you for the question. This is very important, and this is a whole point about studying the community not simply as objects of an analysis, but embracing the community as subjects that can participate in not only the research and the interpretation of what the research means. So for example, when our PhD students defend their dissertation on campus, when they've studied the community, we have a community event where they explain their dissertation to the community, and we have a dialogue. So that's very important. We had a D7 called Difference. Well, we had an event where we organized something we called the Gathering of the Difference Makers. This was our list of people in the community that were the leadership of the community. And we brought them on campus and acknowledged them as the difference makers. We also have over there a book that reflects the research done on campus about the community. But guess what? The community didn't know anything about it. People went out, gathered data, brought it back, did whatever they did, and the community was left wondering what happened. So what we did is we went into the university archives in the library and we created a volume of the results of research on the community and then distributed that to the difference makers, creating that dialogue. Remember what I said, drop the moat down over the bridge down over the virtual moat, the actual moat that separates the campus from the community. So your question is right on time. In other words, Black Studies came from the community. And now we have a chance to reconnect with this digital tool, but remember, it's possible to get lost in the digital tools and speak a language nobody understands. That's why I said make it plain. You understand what I'm saying? Good.
Thank you for your presentation. I had a question about I was wondering what is your response to the critiques of the digital humanities in general? Like, for example, you mentioned sort of that example with distance learning and sort of the faculty from Ghana, but the neoliberal, sort of corporate university oftentimes uses distance learning as like a cash cow, right? So it's not really about, spreading knowledge, it's about how do we sort of get more student dollars. So I was just wondering how do you sort of think about those sort of things?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There is an interesting transition the world is going through right now regarding this revolutionary technology that we're experiencing. So you're exactly right. And there are serious problems. Let me just mention one, and then I'll get specifically to your question regarding political economy. An economy had been set up based on people working, getting paid, and therefore able to go out and buy stuff. Henry Ford used to say, I pay my workers $5 a day so they could buy these damn cars. But now what we have is increased productivity based on the new technologies that represent the decline of labor, and so you have more stuff and less possibility of buying that stuff. So what the society is confronting is if they produce without payment to labor, they have to find a way to circulate goods and services without pay. So capitalism is in a very interesting contradiction. The current president-elect is speaking like magic, that everybody's going to go back to work like those old plants in Detroit are suddenly going to come alive. Well, that's not going to happen. So we're really in a moment where there's a crisis. Now, your point about the higher education and the neoliberal model is very important. But inside the academic world, there is another option. So we've all heard of copyright, but there's also not only copyright, there's copyleft. There's a sense of a new commons where Lawrence Lessig, the lawyer, is the reference I would give you in his book Free Culture, that there's a whole idea that humanity is at a point where it's possible now for us to share. So I would say to you here at Purdue is all this technology is here. And it can be used by you if you think outside of the box. Stay in the box, and the box is like where people are taught that's where you can get a job. So box up, but if you can think out of the box, you might be able to create a new dynamic with the community, and the community is global. In other words, this is being live streamed. Hello out there. Use your imagination. That's the whole point. I was trying to help you think in ways that are new, because it's an entirely new society we're living in. Very important point, this neoliberal way of thinking that everything is a business and everything is about the bottom line, which is profit. That is that's the struggle that's going on today.
Any other questions?
Good.
There you go.
Welcome, brother. I'm really honored that you're here first. But can you talk a little bit more about who's using your resources? Who's accessing this information? Given that whoever accesses it can use it for anything they want to, how is it being used? How is the work that you've done being used by other people?
It's really interesting. I'm sorry I didn't bring the map, but our websites are being accessed all over the world. So the brothermalcolm.net website used to have 1,000 hits a day. Now there's several hundred hits a day. And I don't know how many countries, but every region of the world. This is a reflection of the importance of Malcolm. And this website is a doorway for people to get access to that information. And the interesting thing is Manning Marable's book was kind of a negation of Malcolm. And there have been many attempts to do that. But to hear Malcolm and to read Malcolm is to get past all of that. Also, I think H. Afro-Am, let me just ask, now you're maybe too young, but how many people here were on H. Afro-Am? Well, look, people who were sharing in this dialogue and debate, there are people who were on H. Afro-Am who started out as freshmen in college and now they're teaching in faculties. And frankly, I tell you, I had a little health issue and that's why I stopped doing it. And now I'm back, I really want to get back on it because it was such a fabulous thing. I mean, for me, it was like, it enabled me to transcend the little deaths of everyday life because I was part of that dialogue, listening to people I agreed with and I didn't agree with, but it was fabulous. And to go places and to have people come up and say they were on H. Afro-Am, because, it's sort of like being in radio or TV or something, who's watching, but when you meet somebody, it's fabulous. So my answer is that a diverse group of people, one last point I'll make about that is that we have to be really clear about the normal productivity of scholarship. We create commodities. A book is a commodity that a for-profit company produces for sale. That becomes the outstanding way that academics are evaluated. Not the content, but the form produced in the marketplace. Now there's a contradiction in that, as far as I'm concerned. So that, for example, right now, in physics, in chemistry and biology, scholars are negating the journals and the books and are self-publishing. So there's a place in New Mexico called the Santa Fe Institute, where they, one of those really big think tanks, where they decided that that was ridiculous. And so we're going to self-publish and make sure that everybody gets it. Now, the Institutes of Health in the United States, the government, is against this neoliberal because it was against the people in this country. In other words, people were getting federal dollars to study stuff and then putting it in journals or in private hands, and you had to pay for it. That was slowing down the application of this. So they said, if you get federal dollars, that information has to be free and available to the public. So we have this struggle going on. Are we producing stuff for sale and for individual profit and gain, or are we publishing material so that life can be better for all of us? That's a fundamental issue. So.
Okay, we have one more question, and then we have some other stuff. It's right here.
I'm glad you was talking about how the contradictions of for-profit and actual learning, because I actually read something that said if it's for-profit, then it's not really good for your mind. But living in a capitalist society and knowing the complexities of privilege in the internet, how do we strike a balance to alleviate the problems of the internet not being free essentially, but we are essentially trying to provide a free service or a free good?
Yeah. No, it's a very important question. There is an old saying about the freedom of the press. But the real meaning of that is the freedom of the press belongs to people who own a press. So your point is well taken. That's the struggle. So for example, that broadband issue, when the bill was passed to bail out the banks in terms of the 2008 crisis, there was a part of that bill that set aside money to build broadband throughout the country, because the rural areas had no broadband, and in many urban areas, people were unserved. And the United States was falling behind. The economy was falling behind other countries. So now we had a struggle, because it was public money to build out the internet, broadband. What was going to be the role of private enterprise? So Kate and I went to the first discussion at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. And we got there early in the morning, and it was this long line. And, but we got there, we were only like a block away from the entrance. But when we saw these brothers who were the first in line, looked like they were homeless, at least didn't have a whole lot, you know what I mean? We'd say, what is going on here? And about 5 or 10 minutes before the door opened, these limousines showed up. And these dudes got out of the limousine and took their proper place at the head of the line. So then they opened the doors, people went in. So we sat down, several rows back, and the dogs came in and they sniffed everybody, that kind of thing. And then the top elites from the government came in. And so this Deputy Secretary of Commerce said, oh, hi, George, how you doing? Hey, Ralph, how you doing? And we're sitting there looking at this. And so then we started turning to each other. Do you know him? I don't know the guy. Do you know him? I don't know the guy. And these were the private companies that were set up to benefit from this huge input of public dollars. And you know what the crisis was? The crisis was, is internet access going to be a public utility, regulated to keep prices down like water? Or is it going to be a private reality that could be rolled out on the basis of redlining communities that don't have enough money to make it as profitable, so only certain communities with access to broadband, so on and so forth? And that's what it's turning out to be. However, there are some communities, like I think it's Lafayette, Louisiana. The people in Lafayette, Louisiana said, no, it's going to be a public utility. So the answer to your question, brother, is not about anybody else but you. The question is, what are you going to do? And what are you going to do? And what are you going to do? In other words, the game is on. The struggle is on. Now, most people are watching TV. You know that injection in the brain, I had that slide? Right? They're playing people. Question is, what do you know about how the society is being organized and transformed right now? This is going on right now. This is new. This ain't the old game. This is a new game. And the question is, are you going to get in it and play that game with your own interest? See, you're at Purdue University, and this is a question I have for you and everybody else here, particularly people who come from a community that needs a lot of help. Let's put it this way. I ask a hypothetical question. If you were in a war and you were able to get behind enemy lines, and behind enemy lines is where the knowledge was and where the technology was, what would you do? Have a party, maybe get high on the weekend. What would you do? Or would you pay attention to the fact that at a certain point they're going to put you out of here? Your butt is going to be out of here. And when you're out of this cocoon, this safe place relative to the community where you came from, then what are you going to be able to do? That's the question for all of us. Anyway, that's just something I had to say. Thank you for asking.
Let's thank